So get ready to get your minds blown as we talk about evolving sales development with these amazing humans that I just met, but yet I feel like they're my besties. So let's just kick it off real quick. I'm going to take a cue from our last moderator with a quick icebreaker. 2 super important questions. Number 1, is a hot dog a sandwich? Yes or no?
No.
I'm going to go no.
I think it depends how you cut it. If you want to cut it up, you can make it a sandwich.
Wow, that's nuanced right there.
Yeah.
Number 2, pineapple on pizza? What do we think?
Yes, but it has to be with something else. There's a pizza place here called Via 313.
Really good, yeah.
Does pepperoni, jalapenos, and pineapple.
So there has to be a, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to go no. No.
No.
I was no my whole life until I had literally pepperoni, jalapenos, and pineapple, and the combination is magic. It's
Spectacular.
give it a try.
Yeah.
It's worth
All
it.
right. Well, we'll get to the real stuff. So evolving sales development teams. When we were talking about this last week on our Zoom, there were 2 really important themes that came out from that conversation, I think, and I'd like to focus us there. So let's start off with James, because James has been in this business for longer than I even realized there was a sales development thing. So you've seen the evolution from what, you said 2006?
Yep.
From 2006 to today, you probably have a lot of really good insights about what that evolution has looked like up to this point. And then I'd love to open up the conversation after that about where you think, based on that, it's going.
Wow. All right. So I could talk about this subject for a long time because I have seen about almost 16 and a half years of sales development. Back when I was an SDR, there was no technology like SalesLoft, Outreach. There's no automation whatsoever. So everything was typing it out. I didn't have a content team, copying and pasting templates into emails, sending it out. I even got to the point where I had to learn how to code in Salesforce because our admins just weren't that great. But I'm finding more and more that SDRs are hiding behind technology as the easy route or the shortest route from point A to point B, and the younger SDRs who actually take time to learn from people who've been around for a while are finding that the old school ways of making phone calls, even sending handwritten notes, like the things that I was doing back in the day to get attention, are so unique because no one's doing that anymore. It's kind of like, I don't want to say devolving, but it's kind of going back to the opposite direction of the trends of technology that the younger generations are using today.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I mean, there is so much technology that it almost can be limiting to an SDR's ability to be creative and connect as a human and all of that kind of stuff, which we all know is so important. Jessica, what do you think from where you sit at LeadIQ?
I think to your point, it's almost to a devolving, right? Because you have so many things that are at your fingertips. So how can you use it? And then how can you still have that unique personal experience with each prospect that you're touching? Because everyone knows it's going to be 18 some odd touches that it's going to take to at least get someone's interest, and they've already done any type of research. They know who you are. So what are those things that you can really drive home? So seeing how SDRs are really becoming creative and then taking the technologies that they have access to really take it to the next level.
Right, so do the long math first.
Yep.
That's really hard. I have 2 kids that are in high school, and I often want to teach them through what I learned in school, especially around math, and they look at me like I have 12 heads because they've never really had to do the long math. And so that's a really interesting point. Nathan, now you come from a completely different perspective,
True.
Which is customer success. Mm-hmm. And so what do you see about the evolution of an SDR?
Yeah, I think one thing that's missed a lot is SDRs are usually brought into a company and they're trained by an SDR manager as well as other SDRs. So they don't have a full picture of a business. They typically just know qualifying, right? You come in, you make your calls, you get things done. So what's interesting is it's really helpful to bring somebody in and teach them kind of the entire scope of the business, right? Attach them to an account executive so they understand, what does that sale look like? What does it closing look like? So while you're qualifying, this is why you're doing those things, so you understand what it's leading towards. And then as well on the post side, where, hey, once we have this customer, and we're nurturing them and growing them and finding additional value, like it's really good for an SDR to understand what the customers actually do with the product, right? So I think expanding outside of just qualifying and just getting in the door, like help them know, and then it also makes them stickier within your company because they're going to know all the other venues that they can go towards if maybe being a salesperson isn't best for them, right?
Totally.
So that's where I would start.
Yeah, I love that because I think that sometimes we can hold, I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but like in our minds, there seems like a natural path from an SDR to an AE. But that's not the case. And that might be part of what's evolving more and more is that they get such a unique skill set that we get to teach them. They get to learn how to communicate, both writing and verbally. They get to learn how to tell stories. They get to deal with more rejection than probably anybody else in the company. So there's all these things that they're learning that can create other paths, but do we often take off those like very limiting blinders to see other opportunities for an SDR? Do you see that as a big part of how we can better evolve an SDR, is just opening up those blinders a little bit?
I think it's huge, right? I think, again, you've hired an employee at your company. So rather than just seeing them as an SDR, here's a human that has a certain set of skills, and maybe it's not a best fit for an SDR, so don't just kick them out of your company, right? There could be a tremendous amount of opportunity within that person of where they can grow and expand somewhere else. So that goes back to coaching, right? How do we coach effectively and know where this person fits within the business? And again, we can get a lot out of educating them in the SDR space. Like you said, there's so many things SDRs do. And if you can handle that rejection, you can do pretty much anything. But I think nurturing them and growing them as employees is really, really valuable.
Yeah, I would agree. Anything to add to that, Jessica?
Yeah, I'd say one thing that I always try to emphasize with SDR teams is really think about the piece of what you do every day that you love, right? Because you could end up in sales ops, you could end up in CS, you could end up AM, right? There's a lot of different pieces of what you're doing every day. And if the answer is, I really, really hate calling people who don't know who I am, then an AE is probably not the route that's going to make you happy, right? And if you're like, I love process and I love systems, there's a whole world of RevOps, sales ops that could be out there for you. So it's really helping them understand, like, you're getting a really great foundation. What do you really enjoy doing, and how can I help you build that path?
That's awesome. Before we jump to what the other topic is that I think is super important as it relates to the evolution of an SDR, one other question about the SDR and their ability to evolve. In your experience, James, if you could give a new SDR one bit of advice, what would it be? And I'm going to ask that of all of you.
Only one?
Just one. You have to edit.
Gosh, that's a tough one. I'd say, I hate to steal the line from Ted Lasso, but be curious, not judgmental. I mean, you can't not be curious in this role, including your career path, what options are out there within the company, externally outside the company, and learn to play nice in the playground with everybody. It's just, you're going to learn more from other people than you are your own experiences. So always be curious and always associate yourself, align yourself, even with different departments. Customer success will scare excuse my language, but it will scare the shit out of an SDR going into sales.
It's like going to the principal's office, right?
Yeah.
What?
They're like,
they want to talk to me?
Oh crap, like, how do I not make a customer this pissed off, right?
Yeah. How about you, Jessica?
I'd say, echoing a little bit of what James was saying, but the biggest advice that I generally give new SDRs is ask questions. And if something is taking you more than, I have a 10-minute rule with teams, right? Like, if it's taking you more than 10 minutes to build a report, to find the right contact, to find anything, right? There's probably a faster way. And somebody's already gone through it. And if you have a question, there's probably 10 other people in the room that have that same question. So never be afraid to ask a question.
Yeah, that's great advice. Be curious, ask good questions. And from your viewpoint, Nathan, what do you think?
I kind of feel bad because I'm going to say the same thing. I think curiosity is huge, right? To come into the role, I know for me, right out of college, I got a job at Salesforce as an SDR, and I thought I knew everything, right? And I think a lot of SDRs are typically fresh out of college, not always, but a lot are, and they come in thinking they know everything. Like, I know technology, I know how to do this best, I'll be the most efficient, I don't need your advice, I know what I'm doing. And if you can swallow that pride and actually be curious and listen and learn about your product, learn about the problems that customers are facing, like understand what you're selling to, you will be so much more successful and your teammates will like you. So it's good to come in and listen. That's hard to tell a 21-year-old fresh out of college, like, hey, you need to be humble and curious and focus on those things. But if you can do that, you'll have an incredible career.
Yeah, that's great. Curiosity seems to be the main evolving key word for an SDR is just be more curious. Don't rely on all of the technology to do what you can do as a human to get to know the people that you're communicating with and get obsessed with them and with the organization as a whole.
Yeah.
So to pivot a little bit, you can't really evolve SDRs, I don't think, if you don't evolve the leaders that are working with these SDRs. And there's been a lot of conversation about coaching and training and all of that. And in fact, I just posted something on LinkedIn. I'd love if you guys would respond if you see it, about how we all know, based on what people have been saying today, our great speakers, about the fact that that's one of the biggest performance lifters, like turbocharges, when you have good coaching, training, and developing. But what's so interesting, I think, is that organizations, one, don't invest in it like they should, and I'm wondering why, and they specifically don't invest in that frontline leader, which is really the people that drive everything. They do everything. They are engaging with the individual contributor all the time. So how do we help evolve the thinking around how we enable that frontline leader? Because without that, why would we even talk about the evolving SDR?
You want me to go first?
I do.
Okay. I'm going to be mean for a second.
Okay.
The brand new SDR manager coming out of the individual SDR role is an idiot. They don't know anything. They know but their way. They know their process. They know how to get from point A to point B and win the only way they know how to. I always recommend SDRs go into a closing role first, because we are delivering to that side of the fence as our customers before they jump into a sales development leadership role.
That's really interesting. How's that going for you?
I only hire SDR managers that have had closing experience, and it's beautiful because they get it. They know how to speak to RVPs. They know how to speak to sales reps. It's not like, oh, well, should I approach them? Blah, blah, blah. Like, they're also a hell of a lot more likely to go find external training, because one of the things I've found over the years is that internal training for SDRs pretty much is non-existent when it comes to your own companies. And then if they are, the sales enablement teams you're working with are usually behind. So I tend to lean more towards external organizations to help training and enablement, because they're talking about BANT and stuff that's been around since our parents were sales reps. It doesn't work anymore.
Right.
So it's the well-rounded experience coming into a leadership role that is the most valuable part, and you're not going to get that just graduating from an SDR into a
That's
manager.
a really good point. Really good point. There has to be something a little more substantial when you have to get performance through other people. And someone who's had to take a prospect through a sales cycle is doing that from the start to the finish if they're doing it well.
Yeah.
What do you think, Jessica, about just the evolution of the sales leader?
Yeah, I think it's critical that organizations are giving training support to those new leaders, right? Because not only are you someone who potentially was an SDR who's now moved to a leadership position, so you're new as a people leader, you're probably still relatively new to the workforce, you're potentially new to the product, right? And it's a big shift, and you've seen everything in your process. James, to your point, you've been doing it this way. So really, I think one of the best pieces of advice I got as an early leader was don't expect anyone that you manage to do it the same way you did it, right? Empower them to do things the way where they can be successful, and then show them a path to success. I think companies like you are all super lucky that your companies are allowing you the day off to come to an organization, an event like Tenbound. Things like this are just so. I remember in San Francisco at the Ritz, I think, was one of the first events, Tenbounds, that I went to, and it was so pivotal to me, where I learned all these things and I saw these amazing speakers, and I'm like, I can take this back and impact the team, and it was just so great.
Yeah.
Can I clarify one thing?
Sure.
No offense meant on the whole idiot comment. We're all idiots when we're first going into leadership. Thank you.
Yes, that's true. Oh my God, when I think back on all the mistakes that I made as a first-time leader, I think that's why the question is so important to me now, because I probably let go of people that I shouldn't have because the color of their hair reminded me of like a girl that I beat up in high school, maybe. Seriously, things that ridiculous would cause me to make decisions that were probably hurting my business more than helping. From your standpoint, from a customer success standpoint, one, do you see the same challenges that maybe new sales leadership steps into on the customer success side, and how do you see it just all evolving, just raising the bar for everybody?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. And I think from my career history, I can't speak for all companies, I typically don't see the same problem. I think people in CS that get promoted are really good at managing people. They're really good at nurturing. They're really good at coaching, because that's what we do with our customers every day. So it's always fun coming to these events because you get a lot of SCO kickoff, a lot of really good stuff. And it's like, hey guys, you already have a department in your company that's doing all these things, right? We're coaching, we're nurturing, we're listening, we're finding problems, we're solving those problems. I used to always joke that my job in CS is to resell the same product that somebody doesn't like for more money. Like, we're good salespeople, right? It's just really challenging to get that across to sales. Not necessarily that we're looked down upon, like, oh, you went to CS because you failed in sales. Wherever you are, I heard that earlier. but the point is, you have this incredible department inside your company that know what your customers are doing, that knows the pain points, that know how to go sell to them effectively. And I think in terms of evolving your leadership, sales managers typically are very numbers oriented, they're very metrics oriented, very activity oriented, which is all good. That's a big part of your job. But you also have to be good at managing people and managing and growing those employees so that they become better people outside of work as well, right? So I think to evolve, the one thing I'd say everybody that's here is connect your sales and CS departments together, right? Take your managers in CS and connect them to their managers in sales and let them coach each other. They can both walk away with a lot of really valuable things. And same thing with SDRs, connect them with the CSM. Understand, hey, how do our customers talk about our products? Are they using it? What's the pain points that they have? And then when they're pitching it, those become highly more personalized because they're like, hey, I know the struggles you deal with, right? We got 5 customers doing the same thing, and this is how we help them out. It just creates a much more consultative nature. So that's number one. I'd put those two together and make sure they have those relationships. But 2, right, it's the investment, right? You have to invest in your sales leaders just like you do everybody else. You have to bring them, you have to coach them, you have to train them how to manage people, not just hitting a quota, if that makes sense.
Totally.
Oh, for sure. It's the holistic approach to performance. It's not just about the outcome. It's all the inputs that happen before that
100%.
matter so much. So one last thought for the group around just evolving not only the sales development people that are doing the job every single day, but the leadership that supports them. Let's go up one more notch. How do we help influence the evolution of the people that we might have to get our resources from to recognize the true value of what we're delivering to the organization? Because I think that there's lots of perceptions out there, at least in my experience, that organizations don't understand necessarily the ROI that comes from a well-oiled sales development machine.
Yeah.
Really. And so how do we help evolve the conversation around the contribution back to the business? Does that make sense? Probably something you really are thinking about right now, James.
Yeah, I probably need to go last on this one.
I mean, the only thing I could say is it's very difficult, right? Because companies have kind of baked into their brain the mathematical equation that I've heard from a lot of people here today of like how many calls lead to opportunities, lead to conversions, and like that is the math of sales. And if you know how it works, we just need to make more calls and we'll get more opportunities. And to go in and say, hey, look, I think Twilio was on earlier. The conversation of the quality of conversations and relationship building is way more valuable because you can make 10 calls and have really effective conversations that drive better opportunities. But a manager that's used to having 100 calls a day, that's a really hard mind shift to break. So I don't know how you do it. I know that it needs to be done, and the companies that have done it are finding a ton of success. They're a good example.
Exactly.
And maybe that's how. It's like, hey, here's all the examples of how it's working. We should give it a try, right? That's a hypothesis. Give it a shot. But it's difficult sometimes to get upper management when they're used to like, no, this works. It's not working anymore, right?
This is the playbook. We run these specific plays, and there's no way to break out of what's been working, recognizing that there are outside circumstances that create, instability and maybe not the performance we want, but what we can control, we should probably evaluate and maybe
Yeah.
evolve into something different. Quality, maybe, versus quantity is one of those things. How about for you, Jessica?
Yeah, I'd say that it's an interesting. I mean, I could probably talk for hours on this topic. It's a very interesting philosophy if you take from an upper C-suite perspective, and their first thought's going to be, I'm going to bottoms down model this, right? And we're going to figure this out, and I'm going to tell you this is how many people, and if you have this many people, it will hit our number, right? And if you look at the companies who are doing that, they're probably not doing as well as they could be, right? Because you can't say, I'm going to hit $100 million and I'm going to do it because this and this and this and this and this is all, these things are going to happen, and I'm going to model this out 4 quarters in advance, and everything's going to line up, and I'm going to give you this many people and they'll do exactly this every day. There's so much variability into that. So I think if you can tops up it and meet in the middle with the bottoms down modeling, and to an extent of this is a way to do it better and more personal and more actual good conversations versus I'm just going to put more people, more activity, more, and expect to get more.
Yeah, so what I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is we've got to be very thoughtful about what are the inputs. What is a KPI that really is driving the value of what it is that an SDR is doing? Is it dials anymore? I don't know. Is it number of conversations? Is it how many people are replying to your email? I mean, those are all common things we hear all the time, but is that really what's going to evolve an SDR org or not? So can you answer that? And then we'll open it up for questions. What do you think about just evolving the process of what we measure?
I think we should measure everything. Activity, for me, is not a performance indicator. It's a metric indicator. It's an analysis. Unless you're in trouble and struggling, you're probably on the way out of the company. Then we start, in my world, we start looking at your calls and emails. For me, it's more so, I'm more operationally minded, where I try to take all the data possible and create ratios and work backwards, kind of like a dyslexic way of building teams. End result, you work backwards, find those milestones along the way. But the thing is, when it comes to leadership beyond sales development, they don't know what the hell they're talking about if they're telling you what to do in the team, because they've probably never been an SDR. They've probably never been a sales rep. They probably haven't been anything relevant in 10 to 20 years, depending upon the company. But when it comes down to it, it matters the success. It matters the end result and how we can support every team member to get there. But the biggest thing that I found over the past probably 5-6 years, giving them a voice, giving them what they need, because they're moving so much faster than everybody else in the organization. You can do the analysis, you can look at the analytics, you look at the performance, the goal attainment, even against every other SDR, which is something I actually move away from. I don't like to compare SDRs to one another, but more against their targets. The moment I gave them a voice, it was something that was such an eye-opening experience for me. We now have SDRs meeting with our CXOs internally, giving them a voice all the way up the chain.
Yeah, it totally goes back to what you were saying, Nathan, that if you're not already considering a way to involve SDRs in other parts of the business, then you're making a big miss.
Yeah, and I'd add that executives think it's a metrics-driven team. It's this many calls, this thing, and you end up in this much pipeline. But it is much more of an art form than a science.
Yeah, I would agree.
Because it's relationship building.
On top of that, it's also a mental game, right? Yeah. How you think about what you're doing every day is going to drive the way you feel, which is going to drive the way you act and get you the result that you want or you don't.
Yeah.
So awesome. It was so great to do this panel with you guys. We've got 1 minute left in case anybody has any questions. Yeah.
I work for a where SDR compensation, where you work on post company SDRs. Given the fact that a lot of CFOs, numbers, dials, conversion, revenue, what do you feel
I mean, I feel like we could have a whole conference around SDR compensation, but go ahead.
I can answer pretty quickly. I wouldn't give you my money to go to a casino. So if you're taking a percentage of the variable component of an SDR and put it in somebody else's hands, and if that's closer sucks, I'm not making full OTE. But then on the flip side, you have some 2 or 3 SDRs that make double comp, and then your CFO goes, why is your SDR making 200 grand a year? Like, because they're getting deals that close, man. Like, the more, it's a psychological game for an SDR, the more you put the benefit in their hands of making the money. I hate the word control because it's an illusion, but the fact you put that responsibility into their hands to make the money, you'll always have a better outcome. And then if you want to, bonus them at the end, give them a spiff for a couple $100 for every deal that closes, great. But at the same time, it also depends upon the deal size, depends upon the segment you call into, et cetera. But SDRs are a machine. They're supposed to be a predictability machine, as I call it. You got to compensate on the behaviors that have the outcomes, not what somebody else does with those outcomes.
Yeah, I would agree. It's really risky to put the SDRs, like the way they pay their bills, in the hands of somebody else. And so while it sounds really great, but it fails more times in my experience than it has worked, for all the same reasons that James said. They've got to feel ownership of what it is that they're doing, and they're not trained to influence an AE to do better at what they do. And that's what they'd have to do, is get in the middle of a deal. You don't want an
100%.
SDR getting in the middle of a deal, do you?
Yeah,
You don't want your SDRs calling your AEs 5 times a day saying, why haven't you moved this to SQL? Like,
I asked one of my former sales leaders, I'm like, would you put a sales rep's comp in an SDR's hands? No.
Why not? Let's go ahead and try it. Jessica,
Let's
how about
evolve.
Any recommendations from you?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, and I've always done it as a spiff, right? Where it's like, then they get the excitement,
get
and
excited
they're
by that.
watching it to the end, and then it's like, I'm going to pay you above what you can control if this actually closes.
And you can, one of the things that we work on is we'll spiff for closed won, but we save that spiff for a higher dollar deal size.
Yep.
So then there's some motivation that some of them will chase the whales, and they like it. And that's great.
Yep.
And one last thing that an SDR gave me feedback years ago, which is very true. Their name in lights, when one of their deals sources from them, is far more valuable than any money that they've ever received.
Yeah.
Because
Getting a shout out from the AEs and the sales
even
VPs.
the CEO or head of sales,
that's huge.
it's far more valuable.
Anything to add in final comments, Nathan?
I think my final comment to add, and it has nothing to do with that, unfortunately, because I agree with them entirely, is continually evolve this, right? Like with your SDRs, it's not a one and done, right? You don't evolve and all of a sudden everything's fixed. Like, it's a continual process. And don't wait for problems to start evolving, right? Because you're going to hit a point to where you have a bunch of problems because you didn't continually grow and continually look. And success can hide a lot, right? If everybody's hitting their quota, everything's great, you could have a ton of problems that you don't know about yet. So always be looking, always be growing, and always be evolving. That's where I'd leave it.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. It was so nice to meet the 3 of you, and I hope we stay in touch.
Cool. Sounds great.
All right.